Imagine standing alone in the heart of a forgotten wilderness. The sky, bruised purple by a setting sun, presses down on the jagged silhouette of the Bitterroot Mountains. There is no sound, no birds, no wind, just the cold grip of something unseen, coiling around your spine. Then, out of the silence, a sudden pulse, an invisible surge that bends the trees and warps the air. You blink, and everything feels off. Behind you, your shadow lingers longer than it should. You are no longer alone. And whatever is out there, it has always been watching. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. May you receive great rewards for subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this story. Now, let's continue with the story. In the summer of 1997, a geologist named Thomas Elridge entered the Bitterroot Wilderness under a cloudless sky and the quiet thrill of solitude. He was no amateur. Thomas had spent years charting the unstable ridgelines and forgotten fault lines of Montana's wildest terrain. That season, he had volunteered to conduct a geological survey near the Magruder Corridor, a remote mountain pass that twisted through sheer rock faces and dense pine forests untouched by time. He had driven out in a four-wheel vehicle modified for off-trail conditions, carrying weeks' worth of supplies, a radio transmitter, geological instruments, and a detailed map marked with ancient seismic fault data. According to the log from his base station, he checked in regularly, until one evening, when his voice was heard for the final time. "I'll be heading back before the sun sets," he had said through the satellite radio, the signal crackling but clear. He never returned. When the sun rose the next morning, and the base had received no further word, alarm set in. Within hours, a coordinated search effort began. Helicopters scouted from above, and ground teams moved in from both the north and south entrances of the Magruder Corridor. Bloodhounds were flown in. Every protocol was followed with clinical precision. After 3 days of sweeping canyons and dry riverbeds, a team led by Ranger Elena Hartman discovered a disturbing clue: a small, open clearing near a collapsed rock outcrop. There, arranged in eerie neatness, lay Thomas's equipment, his pack, soil samples, a half-eaten protein bar, and a still-active radio beacon. His boots stood side by side, their toes pointing toward the cliff's edge. Yet the ground around the area was pristine. No drag marks. No disturbance in the grass. No footprints beyond his own entering the site. Hartman crouched and touched the rock. It was strangely warm, humming faintly as if holding the echo of something recently departed. She looked up and realized that the surrounding forest had gone silent. Not even insects buzzed in the air. Back at the operations center, another anomaly surfaced. Dr. Samuel Vieri, a seismologist working with a local university, had been monitoring data from geomagnetic sensors placed near the corridor. He pulled Ranger Hartman aside and pointed at a screen blinking red. "At precisely 21:43 the night Elridge vanished," he said. "This sensor picked up a sudden spike in magnetic activity. Localized. Short. Violent. And then, nothing." Vieri showed her the graphs. The reading had shot beyond known ranges, even for seismic disturbances. There was no geological event to explain it. No electromagnetic storm in the region. No military exercises. The anomaly was too concentrated, too sudden, and too clean. Something had happened, something outside of normal Earth behavior. And Thomas Elridge was gone. No one knew what to call it. Officially, it would be labeled an unresolved disappearance under unknown conditions. Unofficially, however, whispers began to circulate. Among the search crews. Among the rangers. Among the locals who had long told stories of strange lights above the peaks, of whispers in the pines, of people who vanished after venturing too far. The Bitterroot was not just wilderness. It was hiding something. The weeks following Thomas Elridge's disappearance were marked by a silence more unsettling than panic. The official search was called off after 10 days. No trace. No evidence of an accident. No signs of foul play. The mountain had simply taken him, and given nothing back. But Ranger Elena Hartman couldn't let it go. She had spent over a decade patrolling the Bitterroot backcountry, and she had seen her share of tragedies, injuries, animal attacks, lost hikers. But this was different. Too clean. Too calculated. And the equipment, laid out with that strange precision, haunted her dreams. 3 days after the operation ended, she returned alone to the site. The clearing was just as it had been. The pine needles undisturbed. The boots still upright, though the gear had been bagged and catalogued by forensics. What struck her immediately was the stillness. Again, no birds. No rustling of leaves. No flies. The air was heavy, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Elena unpacked a portable geomagnetic reader, borrowed without permission from Dr. Vieri's lab. She knelt beside the stone ledge, calibrated the device, and waited. The needle twitched. Just for a second. Then again, higher this time, sharper. It spiked briefly before falling back to normal. The fluctuations were irregular, like something deep beneath the ground was pulsing. Suddenly, a faint ringing buzzed in her right ear. High-pitched, almost electronic. She turned, expecting to see someone. Nothing. She stood and slowly scanned the treeline. That's when she noticed the circle. Rocks, 10 of them, arranged in a near-perfect ring just beyond the clearing, partially obscured by overgrowth. She was certain they hadn't been there during the search. Weather-worn, covered in lichen, but each one bore the same curious notch carved near the top. Some kind of symbol, or tool mark, or maybe something older. Elena pulled out her camera, snapped a few shots, and stepped into the center of the ring. The ground hummed beneath her boots. For a brief moment, everything around her seemed to tilt. Her stomach flipped, and her vision blurred, like the world had shifted half an inch sideways. The buzzing in her ear grew louder, becoming a layered tone that vibrated through her spine. Then, silence. She stumbled backward out of the circle and dropped to one knee, panting. The feeling passed. Everything returned to normal. The forest was still. The sunlight unchanged. But something had pressed against her mind in that moment. Something vast and cold, like an ancient engine awakening far below. Back at the ranger station that night, she uploaded the photos. But the images of the stone circle were corrupted, distorted by bands of static, color bleeds, and strange geometric fragments. The metadata showed no sign of tampering, but one anomaly stood out. Each image file ended with the same hexadecimal string, 4D2D3F9C. She checked online databases. It wasn't a camera error code. It wasn't a known formatting issue. But a cross-reference in a scientific forum revealed something odd. Those exact digits had appeared in the logging data of several deep Earth magnetic pulses detected near Yellowstone in the late 80s. Patterns. Across decades. Across wildernesses. This wasn't random. Elena knew she had crossed an invisible line. She wasn't just looking for a missing geologist anymore. She was trespassing into something that watched from beneath. Elena Hartman didn't sleep that night. She sat in her dimly lit cabin at the ranger station, the corrupted images of the stone circle flickering on her screen. She'd seen digital glitches before, weather damage, corrupted SD cards, static from proximity to metal. But these weren't that. These distortions had symmetry, intent. One photo showed a perfect spiral pattern where trees should have been. Another had a faint outline of a human figure, elongated and warped, standing just outside the stone ring. But no one had been there. She was sure of it. The hexadecimal code, 4D2D3F9C, echoed in her mind like a countdown. She scribbled it across a page, over and over, until the numbers no longer made sense. Then she noticed something that chilled her. If rotated 180 degrees, the code took on the shape of a pattern. Angular. Almost like the symbols carved into the rocks. By dawn, Elena had made a decision. She would return to the Magruder corridor again. But this time, she wouldn't go alone. She called Dr. Samuel Vieri. Despite his skepticism, he had grown increasingly intrigued by the sensor data. The moment Elena mentioned the corrupted images, his tone shifted. "I'll bring the portable array," he said quietly. "But we leave at first light. I don't want to be there after dark." The two met the following morning with minimal gear and neutral expressions. Neither one dared to speculate aloud what they expected to find. The drive to the corridor was silent. They arrived by midday. Elena led the way back to the clearing, where the air still held its unnatural weight. When they reached the spot, Vieri froze. He pointed toward the trees. The stones were gone. The ring had vanished. No sign of disturbance. No indentations. Only bare earth where something had clearly been. Elena blinked in disbelief. They were right here. I swear it. Vieri said nothing. Instead, he unpacked his equipment and began placing the small magnetic probes in a wide radius. Elena scanned the clearing again. Then her eye caught a faint shimmer, something half buried near the rock ledge. She brushed away the soil. A small, silver object lay embedded in the dirt. It was metallic but weathered, shaped like a flattened hexagon with grooves on its surface. She picked it up carefully. It was cool to the touch, and oddly heavy for its size. "Sam," she called. "You need to see this." Before he could reach her, the probe started pulsing. The central monitor flashed. Readings jumped. "Massive spike!" Vieri shouted. "Localized field distortion. It's centered on you." Elena dropped the object instinctively, but the field held steady. The air around them began to vibrate faintly, as if a low-frequency sound wave had enveloped the forest. Birds took off in chaotic flocks. Branches creaked without wind. Then they heard it. A sound, distant and subterranean, like a great engine turning once in the depths of the earth. It came from beneath the corridor, echoing through the soil and up their legs. Vieri backed away, his face pale. "That's not seismic." Suddenly, a voice crackled from Elena's radio, Thomas Elridge's voice. "Returning to camp, before sunset." The exact same words from the night he vanished. But they were warped, drawn out, spoken with a distorted, unnatural rhythm, as if played backward through time. Elena stood frozen. "That's his last transmission." "No," Vieri whispered. "That was just recorded now." They checked the time log on the radio. The signal had come through 10 seconds ago, from the same channel Thomas had used. Elena looked down at the silver object on the ground. The grooves on its surface were glowing faintly now, pulsing in sync with the probes. She reached for it again. The moment her fingers touched the metal, a wave of dizziness hit her like a punch. The trees bent inward. The clearing stretched out. Vieri's voice turned to static. And then, silence. When she opened her eyes, she was still in the clearing. But Vieri was gone. So was the gear. And the trees. They weren't the same trees. The air was denser here, heavier, warmer, and still. Elena stood in the same clearing, but it no longer felt like the Magruder corridor. The sky above was washed in a pale amber hue, muted as if behind a thick pane of glass. The forest was silent, yet alive in a different way. The trees around her were taller, darker, and twisted in unfamiliar shapes, like they had grown while dreaming of something else. She called out for Vieri. No response. The silver object remained in her palm, now cold again and dim. She tried her radio. Static. The display blinked but showed no signal, no time, no channels, only a blank green light, pulsing in rhythm with her heart. Elena stumbled forward, pushing past the low branches that hung like curtains. Every few steps, she stopped to listen. The forest had a strange texture here. Footfalls made no sound. Even her breath seemed swallowed by the air. Yet her instincts screamed that she was being watched. Then she saw it. Half concealed by vines and moss stood a stone structure, unlike anything from this world. It wasn't built, it had grown. A ring of massive black pillars, perfectly smooth, tilted inward toward a central monolith carved with the same hexagonal patterns as the object in her hand. The markings pulsed faintly, whispering thoughts that weren't hers into her mind. She felt compelled to approach. As she stepped inside the ring, her skin tingled. The silver object began to vibrate gently in her hand. The closer she got to the monolith, the louder the whispers became, not in sound, but in her thoughts. Shapes, numbers, pulses, moments. And then, she saw Thomas, or what was left of him. He stood at the base of the monolith, unmoving, his eyes wide and unfocused. His body was intact, but his expression was blank, like a statue frozen in the act of waking. Elena called his name. No reaction. She reached for him. The moment her fingers touched his arm, she was pulled violently backward, not by force, but by sensation. The forest vanished. Her vision tunneled, warped, and then exploded into flashes, images that weren't hers. She saw Thomas's last moments. He had approached this place willingly, drawn by the same pulse. The circle had appeared for him too. He had touched the monolith. And then, his mind had split. Not torn, but copied. Part of him was still alive in this forest. Another part had been taken, elsewhere. Elena fell to her knees, gasping. When she looked up, Thomas was gone. So was the structure. The forest had shifted again. Now it was night, and a pale blue light filtered through the branches above. A distant humming returned, rising slowly from deep within the earth. And through the trees, Elena could now see things she hadn't before. Figures. Not human. Not animal. Tall, slender forms moved slowly between the trees, always just at the edge of her vision. They glowed faintly, not from light, but from presence, like echoes walking backward through time. She felt no fear, only awe, and something deeper. Recognition. The silver object in her hand clicked once, then unfolded. It reshaped itself into a band around her wrist, pulsing with steady warmth. Her radio sparked back to life. Static cleared. A single voice cut through. "Ranger Hartman, come in. This is Camp Baker. Do you read?" It was a voice from her time. She looked around once more. The forest shimmered faintly, the figures watching her silently. She pressed the call button. "This is Hartman. I read you." But the voice on the other end didn't respond. Instead, the radio repeated the same phrase over and over. "Stay out of the corridor. Do not return. The forest remembers." And then silence again. Elena sat motionless beneath the twisted trees, the radio still pressed to her ear. The silence that followed that last transmission was absolute, oppressive, as if the forest itself was weighing down on her shoulders. Her breath was shallow. Every instinct told her to run, but to where? This place, wherever it was, had no path, no direction. The terrain had reshaped itself, bent under rules not governed by time or physics. She checked her compass. The needle spun aimlessly. Then, without warning, her wristband pulsed. A small projection of pale light flickered above it, revealing a strange symbol, hexagonal, interlocked, shifting with invisible logic. Numbers faded in beneath it. A set of coordinates. Elena recognized the format, but not the location. She scrawled them onto her notepad, and something in her memory stirred. She had seen similar numbers once, in a classified report during her early years with the Forest Service. Buried deep within restricted archives. A document marked Black Ridge, Access Denied, detailing a series of spatial anomalies linked to unexplained disappearances across Montana and Idaho. But this one was different. These coordinates pointed to a location that did not exist on any current map, a dead zone buried under the eastern edge of the Bitterroot Range. No trails. No records. No names. As she stood, the ground beneath her shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. The trees swayed in unison without wind. She felt as though she had become part of a breathing entity, alive, aware, and watching her. She began to walk. The forest made way for her, revealing a narrow passage between blackened trees. As she stepped forward, the environment began to subtly morph. Familiar shapes reappeared. Boulders she'd seen in the real corridor, the scarred trunk of a pine marked with her initials from years ago. The world was bending backward. And then, all at once, she emerged. She was back in the original clearing. The gear was gone. The area was gone. But the probes were still staked in the ground, dormant. Sunlight filtered through the trees. It was morning. Elena staggered to her knees, heart pounding. The silver band on her wrist dimmed but remained. Her radio clicked again. "This is Dr. Samuel Vieri," the voice crackled. "If anyone receives this, I'm transmitting from a location that should not exist." The readings confirm the presence of non-linear spatial layering. We're not alone in this range. We never were. Elena's blood ran cold. His voice was slightly distorted but unmistakable. She tried to respond, but the signal cut. She raced back to her vehicle and plugged the coordinates from the band into her onboard GPS. The system hesitated. Error. Then it snapped to a location, a remote elevation over 30 miles east of the corridor, marked by nothing but empty forest. She zoomed in. To her shock, a faint gray dot pulsed at the center of the grid. A symbol. The same hexagonal design engraved on the artifact. Elena stared at the screen. Was that where Vieri had gone? Was that where Thomas had been taken? The question no longer haunted her. It pulled her. Whatever she had stepped into, whatever had allowed her to return, had left a trail. A message. A test. Back at Camp Baker, she submitted a false report. Temporary signal loss. Equipment malfunction. No trace of Elridge. Standard disappearance protocol. But as night fell and the wind swept through the pine outside her cabin, she made her decision. She would go to the coordinates. Not as a ranger. Not as a rescuer. But as someone who had already crossed over once, and had come back marked. The forest remembered. And it was calling her again. 3 days later, Elena left at dawn. She told no one. The coordinates had burned themselves into her memory. The forest had changed her. Since returning from the corridor, she had been plagued by vivid dreams, visions of hollow mountains, tunnels lit by pulses of violet light, and echoing voices that spoke not in words, but in ancient frequencies that vibrated deep within her bones. She drove as far as the roads allowed, then hiked. The terrain beyond the marked trails was treacherous, jagged slopes, overgrown ravines, and unmarked valleys that twisted like veins beneath the earth. With every step closer to the coordinates, her wristband pulsed faintly, guiding her with a rhythm that felt almost biological. Like a heartbeat, one not her own. By late afternoon, she arrived at the elevation marked by the GPS, 7,184 feet. There was nothing. No cave. No trail. No structure. Just a wide plateau of bare stone surrounded by wind-stripped trees. But the moment she stepped onto the center of the flat surface, the air changed. Stillness fell like a curtain. Birds stopped singing. The wind died. And then the ground trembled, not a quake, but something deeper, like a breath drawn in slow motion. Beneath her boots, the stone began to glow along etched lines too faint to see before, hexagonal patterns, forming a spiral. The wristband pulsed violently, and then, clicked. The ground under her gave way. She didn't fall. She was taken. Elena awoke in darkness. But it wasn't absence, it was layered, like being under 100 veils. Her head spun, but she wasn't afraid. Something in her knew this place. Knew its pulse. She stood. Around her, the walls shimmered like obsidian and glass. Faint veins of light pulsed through them, reacting to her presence. She was in a vast corridor, but not one carved by hand. It had grown, organically, with precision. Every surface vibrated with intelligence. She followed the light. Further in, the corridor widened into a chamber so vast the ceiling was lost in shadow. Shapes floated in the air, diagrams, memories, blueprints of things not yet born. In the center of the chamber was a platform, and on it stood a figure. Samuel Vieri. He turned slowly, and for a moment, she thought he had not aged. But his eyes, they shimmered with something else now. Something behind them. Elena, he said softly. You came. What is this place? She asked. Vieri looked around. Not a place. A junction. A memory vault. A relay point between what was and what may be. She took a cautious step forward. How are you still here? It's been days. His voice lowered. Time does not move the same here. I've been inside the flow, studying, listening. They do not speak like we do. They show. They embed. She stared at him. Who are they? Vieri paused, then pointed upward. Projected into the darkness above them was a rotating field of interconnected hexagons, each one holding an image. A moment. A disappearance. Thomas Elridge. A woman in a red coat from 1972. A group of hikers from 1954. A native tracker from 1881. All lost. All staring into the same light. They're not abducting us, Vieri said quietly. They're absorbing us. Mapping our minds. Collecting memory as structure. They're building something. Elena backed away. A network. Yes, he whispered. One that spans beyond biology. A consciousness lattice. Every person who vanishes becomes a node. And you? She asked. I stayed to warn them. But now, I don't know if I ever left. The chamber shifted around them. The images dimmed. The corridor behind her dissolved into smoke. Elena, Vieri said, his voice trembling now. If you go back, if you leave, you'll carry part of this with you. Just like Thomas did. Just like I did. She looked down at the band on her wrist. It glowed steadily now, synced with the light of the chamber. You're marked, he said. A transmitter. A bridge. Then the platform began to retract. Everything around her cracked with blinding light. The chamber collapsed inward, not in destruction, but in transformation. Data streamed around her in spirals, wrapping her in pulses of color and sound. And suddenly, she was standing in her cabin at Camp Baker. Her clothes were soaked. Her watch read the same time she left. No hours had passed. But the silver band remained. And deep inside it, a new set of coordinates had begun to glow. Elena stood motionless in her cabin, drenched in cold sweat, her pulse matching the rhythm of the glowing band on her wrist. The room looked untouched, yet everything felt different. Her perception, sharper, faster, layered. She could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the break room 3 doors down. She could feel vibrations in the earth, distant yet distinct, as though something deep beneath was still awake. She reached for her field journal with trembling fingers and opened to the page where she had written the first coordinates. A second sequence of numbers now burned into her memory. She jotted them down. Then she noticed something chilling. When plotted on a satellite map, the first set of coordinates, where she'd found the obsidian corridor, aligned precisely with a known magnetic anomaly documented by the U.S. Geological Survey in the late 70s. The second set aligned with an abandoned Cold War listening post, long buried in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, codenamed Echo Point. A third dot appeared on her screen, automatically placed by the system, as if generated. It formed a triangle. At the center of that triangle, deep within an uncharted basin, was nothing but blank map. No trails. No roads. No elevation data. A place outside knowledge. Elena zoomed in. And there, just barely visible under satellite noise, was a symbol embedded into the terrain itself, hexagonal, faint, but unmistakable. She leaned back, heart racing. They're not just collecting us, she whispered. They're building something here. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the cabin. She jumped. No one was supposed to be here. She approached the door cautiously, hand on her flashlight. Another knock, slower this time, deliberate. She opened the door. No one stood outside. But something lay on the doorstep, wrapped in a torn piece of canvas. She knelt and slowly unwrapped it. Inside was a weathered field notebook. The name printed on the front, Thomas Elridge. It was real. The cover had faded under time and sun, but the pages were intact. She opened it. Each page was filled with observations, rock samples, layers, notes on erosion, but halfway through, his writing changed. The entries became scattered, urgent. Symbols. Sketches of the monolith. Diagrams of magnetic waves. And then, it's not geological. The pulses, they follow intention. The stones listen. They're not measuring us. They're learning how to replicate us. I saw someone yesterday. He looked like me, but he moved wrong. Elena's hands shook as she flipped to the last page. I buried the source. It's at the triangle's center. If they reach it, we're no longer necessary, no longer unique. And scrawled beneath that in faint pencil, if anyone finds this, burn it. The cabin lights flickered. Her laptop rebooted without warning. When the screen returned, the map was gone. In its place, a new message appeared, blinking slowly. You are now a node. Her blood turned to ice. The forest outside rustled with wind, but Elena felt no breeze. Something had been watching her since the moment she returned. And now, it knew where she was. To continue the story, please respond with, continue. Elena backed away from the screen, heart pounding. The message remained. You are now a node. She yanked the power cord. The laptop went dark, but the words were still there, faintly, etched into her vision like an afterimage burned by lightning. She blinked. It didn't fade. Outside, the forest groaned. The pine trees swayed not with wind, but with something slower, heavier, like the exhalation of a buried machine. Her cabin, once a place of solitude, now felt like a sealed room in a vessel too close to surfacing. The silver band on her wrist tightened. Suddenly, her radio crackled. Not the main unit, her old handheld, dead for years, buried in the bottom drawer of her supply chest. It came to life with a burst of static, then a voice.
Low.
Measured. Not entirely human. Elena Hartman. Echo Point is open. The gate sequence has begun. You are part of the system now. The transmission cut, leaving the room in a silence that throbbed like a wound. Echo Point. The abandoned Cold War station she had dismissed as a ghost from military lore. But now she knew it had never been meant for war. It had been designed to listen. Not to the enemy. Not to foreign powers. But to them. She opened Elridge's notebook again and ran her fingers over the final page. I buried the source. There was something out there, something ancient. Something that could end whatever these things were trying to build. A seed of chaos in a system of perfection. And Thomas had hidden it. But for how long? Elena packed only the essentials. No electronics. No locator beacons. Just maps, a compass she no longer trusted, and Elridge's notebook. She left the ranger station before dawn. The forest greeted her with a hush. The journey to Echo Point took her through territory long untouched, cliffs split by frost, valleys devoured by fog, rivers that no longer ran where the map said they should. Her sense of direction bent around unseen forces. The deeper she traveled, the more reality unraveled. Shapes moved in the distance. Figures between trees. Sometimes they looked like people she knew, former rangers, old friends. But always slightly wrong. Too still. Too smooth. Their eyes never blinked. By the third day, Elena reached the site. It lay buried beneath a collapsed ridge, metal beams twisted like ribs, half swallowed by moss and rock. The entrance, once sealed, was now open, as if waiting. She descended carefully, flashlight flickering. The interior was perfectly preserved. Dustless, cold, and silent. Then the humming began. Low at first, like the purring of an animal asleep in steel. It grew louder as she passed empty rooms lined with consoles still blinking, untouched by time. Screens showed strange readings, spatial frequencies, emotional signatures, memory patterns. It was no longer a listening station. It was a mirror. At the bottom level, she found the chamber. Hexagonal. Just like the others. In the center, beneath glass, was the source. A sphere. Charred. Pulsing weakly. Bound by rings of magnetic fields encoded with human DNA sequences. Names she recognized. Thomas. Samuel. Hers. She moved closer, feeling the pressure behind her eyes increase with each step. Then, her reflection appeared in the glass. Except it wasn't her. The figure moved a moment before she did. Anticipating. Smiling faintly. It raised a hand toward her. So did she. Not a reflection. A response. Then it whispered, without lips. You are the final key. Chaos carrier. Memory seed. The chamber shook. Lights above flickered to red. She looked at the notebook again. One final sentence had appeared on the inside cover, in handwriting not her own. Break the glass, and you break the system. She hesitated, then reached for her emergency axe. Swung. The glass shattered like ice, and the forest above screamed. The moment the glass shattered, a pressure wave burst through the air, silent, invisible, but catastrophic. Elena was thrown backward into a steel pillar. Sparks rained from the ceiling as magnetic fields blinked out one by one. The orb at the center of the chamber cracked down its core, and from within it, something began to leak. Not a substance. A sound. It was soft, like a child's hum, but layered, billions of overlapping tones weaving together in disharmony. It wasn't random. It was memory.
Pain.
joy, fear, rage. Human emotion, raw and unfiltered, erupting from the core like a ruptured dam. The walls trembled. Screens exploded in bursts of color and static. One monitor displayed the message. Lattice breach detected. Node fracture initiated. Then the light above Elena flickered out. Total darkness. But in that blackness, her mind filled with images. Elridge, trapped in a corridor of shifting stone, watching himself from across time. Vieri standing on a shore of silver sand beneath a sky that bent inward. Hundreds, thousands, of others, faces she didn't know but felt she should. All of them linked. All of them reduced to data. Until now. She screamed, not in fear, but in defiance, and the orb responded. The crack widened. The pulse within surged outward like a shockwave through the network. Somewhere far beyond that chamber, systems failed. Geometries collapsed. Sequences unraveled. Across Montana, across forests, across uncharted places that had once pulsed with alien rhythm, the network began to decay. And then, something else awoke. Buried deep beneath the Bitterroot Range, far older than the Lattice, far older than the Watchers, a new signal rose. Chaotic. Unstable. Human. Elena staggered to her feet as the chamber tilted violently. The orb shattered entirely, releasing a blinding wave of violet-blue light that passed through her like flame, but it didn't burn. It ignited. Her memories returned, sharper now. All of them. The warped figures in the forest were echoes, failed replicas. The Lattice had been trying to recreate humanity not from DNA, but from emotion. And in its pursuit of control, it had forgotten the chaos that made people human. She was now carrying that chaos. The band on her wrist fell away, disintegrating into dust. And then, silence. No power. No hum. The chamber stilled. For the first time in what felt like days, she heard her own heartbeat. She climbed the staircase, breath ragged, each step pulling her closer to the surface. When she emerged from Echo Point, the sky above was seared with long, pale scars. Faint streaks of energy curling like smoke across the horizon. The trees, once uniform and pulsing, were now still, dead silent, watching no longer. And in the distance, she saw movement. A figure walking. As it drew closer, she recognized the face. Samuel Vieri. He looked changed. Hollow, yes, but smiling. You did it, he said softly. Elena stepped forward. Did we survive it? Vieri looked up at the sky. We broke the replication. The nodes are collapsing. Memory is returning to the original vessels. Thomas, she asked. He nodded slowly. His echo reached me. He's gone, but not lost. The wind shifted. A real breeze this time. The first sign of natural weather since her return. In her hand, Elridge's notebook had changed. The pages were blank now, but the cover had a new symbol, imperfect, hand-drawn, and human. Not a system. Not a lattice. Just a spiral. A reminder that chaos was not something to be erased, but preserved. Elena turned and walked toward the treeline, the wilderness stretching endlessly before her. Whatever the Watchers had built was broken. But the forest remained. Alive. And free. 3 weeks later, rain finally returned to the Bitterroot Range. Heavy, unrelenting sheets that soaked the earth and scoured the dust from every pine needle. The air smelled of minerals and ash, like a long dormant wound cleansing itself. Life stirred again. Real life. Birds. Insects. The subtle thrum of a forest, no longer under surveillance. But deep beneath that rebirth, a residue remained. Not visible. Not measurable by ordinary means. It hummed quietly beneath the soil, like the fading breath of a dying machine. Elena Hartman now lived alone in a small outpost cabin well beyond the ranger station's jurisdiction. Officially, she was on medical leave following a traumatic wilderness event. Unofficially, no one questioned her absence. The incident report she submitted had been sealed under Level 4 classification, far above her clearance. Someone else had taken interest. Federal. Maybe beyond that. She didn't care. Not anymore. Her days were simple, tending to the forest, watching the skies, and waiting for the next signal. Because though the lattice had collapsed, she knew something fundamental. Not all the Watchers had gone. Some were bound to the system. But others had always lived within the cracks. One evening, while scanning old geological maps, Elena noticed something strange. A symbol, nearly faded from age, had been etched faintly near the triangle center. It wasn't a natural mark. It had 6 sides, and a dot at the center. She grabbed Elridge's notebook. Though blank now, she flipped instinctively to the back cover. The spiral symbol had faded. In its place was a small, pulsing dot. Her laptop, long left untouched, booted up on its own. No input, no signal. But on the screen, a message appeared. Lattice error detected. And beneath it, new structure forming. Her pulse spiked. She turned off the laptop, removed the battery, threw it across the room. But the message remained, burned faintly into the screen like a ghosted image. Later that night, Elena dreamt of the monolith again. But this time, it wasn't static. It was broken, cracked down its center like the orb had been. And from within, something else was growing. Twisting, irregular, alive, and human. When she awoke, her hands were covered in soil. She had no memory of leaving the cabin. Outside, carved into the mud, were fresh markings. Spiral after spiral, stretching across the clearing like a living script. It wasn't over. The Watchers had failed. But something else was rising from their failure. Not perfect. Not orderly. Something wild. Something that remembered being human. The spirals appeared more frequently now. Every morning, Elena awoke to new ones, etched into the dirt outside her cabin, pressed into the frost on her window, drawn in condensation across her mirror. They varied in size and orientation, but they always formed the same pattern, outward chaos from a single central point. A message, a memory, a warning. She stopped cleaning them. Each spiral came with dreams, dense and layered. Not nightmares, but not visions either. They weren't hers. They came from other lives, fragmented and scattered like shards of glass. A boy lost in the Rockies in 1961, a woman who vanished near Flathead Lake in 1987, a hiker swallowed by fog in 2003. In each, she saw the Watchers trying to replicate them, building echoes from memories, recreating their thoughts, their fears, even their regrets. But the system had failed. Emotion was too unstable, too unpredictable. The lattice collapsed because it had tried to impose symmetry on the one force that resisted it, human will. And now, the echoes were returning. Elena began to hear them, faint voices at first, whispering her name just beyond the tree line. At night, when the wind died and the forest lay still, she could make out words. We are not finished. The lattice is gone. But we remain. They weren't threatening. They were looking for something. Or someone. Then, one afternoon, the forest changed again. She had gone to fetch water from a nearby stream when she noticed it. The birds had vanished. The wind had stilled. The entire world had paused. Then she saw the figure, standing halfway down the slope, a silhouette in the mist. It was Thomas Elridge, but older, worn, weathered beyond the years that had passed. He stared at her with quiet urgency, his clothes torn, his skin pale and dry like driftwood. Elena, he said, his voice thin. The system broke. But we're still inside. She stepped forward. What do you mean? He shook his head slowly. The lattice wasn't a prison. It was a shell, a structure to hold them back. Elena's heart froze. They didn't build it, Thomas continued. We did. Long ago. Before memory. To contain what lives underneath. The Watchers weren't the original threat. They were containment. The spiral wasn't just a signature. It was a lock. What's rising now isn't them, Thomas said. It's what they were holding down. He stepped closer, his form flickering faintly, like a projection glitching in real time. You opened the vault. You brought back the chaos. And now, so will it. Suddenly, the ground beneath Elena shifted, just slightly. Enough to feel. A deep tremor. Not seismic. Rhythmic. Like a heartbeat beneath the mountains. Thomas looked past her, toward the ridge. It's awake now. It knows your name. And with that, his image flickered once more, and vanished. Elena stood alone, the trees around her shuddering as though in anticipation. The lattice was gone, but the world beneath it had just begun to stir. The tremors did not stop. For 3 days straight, the ground beneath Elena's cabin pulsed with slow, metronomic beats, so subtle they could barely be measured, yet undeniable. No official seismic readings were released, no news broadcasts acknowledged it. But those living near the Bitterroot Range knew. Their pets refused to go outside. Birds migrated early. The forest was changing. Something ancient was pressing upward. Elena's dreams became darker. No longer visions of past lives, but preludes, flashes of towering structures buried in bedrock, black roots growing through bones, a sky with no stars. She no longer recognized the forest around her. The trees were the same, the terrain the same, but the air had changed. One morning, she awoke to a noise like dry stone grinding against itself. She stepped outside. A crack had opened just beyond the tree line. The earth split in a perfect spiral, its edges smooth, like it had not torn, but unlocked. A staircase descended into the dark, wide enough for 2 people to walk shoulder to shoulder. At the edge of the opening sat something she hadn't seen in weeks. The silver band. Whole. Polished. Waiting. Against every instinct, she picked it up. This time, it didn't clamp onto her wrist. It melted into her skin. Her heart skipped. Immediately, a torrent of information flooded her senses, not in words or images, but in structure. She understood what the lattice had been. Not a prison, not a trap, but a firewall, humanity's attempt to isolate a cosmic infection that predated language. An entity, or perhaps a system, that evolved beneath thought. It fed not on energy, but on patterns, on order, on the predictable rhythm of repetition. Humanity, for all its chaos, had slowly begun to align in ways the entity could harvest, digitally, socially, mentally. The Watchers had been a filter, collecting minds, preserving what made humans unpredictable. But Elena had broken the chain. The filter was gone, and now the core was free. She looked down the spiral staircase. Something called to her from below. Not with sound, with recognition. It knew her doubts, her choices, her willingness to breach every threshold. She was no longer just a node. She was a key. She descended. Each step down felt like falling into deeper time. The walls were ancient, yet smooth, metal and stone fused in a way that defied understanding. Symbols lined the passage. Not hexagons this time. Spirals, tangled with eyes. When she reached the bottom, she stood in a vast chamber, circular, cathedral-like, with no ceiling, just endless dark spiraling upward. In the center, a sphere. Not like the orb from Echo Point. This was alive. It pulsed with a low, bass-heavy beat that rattled her bones. Inside it, things moved, shapes that resembled faces, then shattered into liquid noise. A voice reached into her mind. Not a watcher. Not a memory. A source. You ruptured the lattice. You brought back entropy. Now the spiral expands again. We will grow through you. Elena stepped back. No, she whispered. I won't let you. The sphere pulsed. Not with anger, but amusement. You already have. A mirror formed in the wall behind her. She turned. Her reflection did not match. It smiled and blinked. Elena stared into the mirror, heart pounding. The reflection mimicked her movements perfectly, but there was something wrong. The eyes were too still. The smile too deliberate. Not a duplication, but a correction, a version of her rebuilt through the spiral's logic. Smoothed. Optimized. Predictable. The voice returned, no longer soft. Now echoing, layered, undeniable. You resist, but you are already integrated. You carried the breach. You birthed the next layer. The sphere behind her vibrated violently, tendrils of dark light twisting upward like roots reaching for breath. The chamber responded with groans and cracks. Something beneath the structure was waking, shedding layers like skin. Elena gritted her teeth and stepped toward the mirror. Her reflection did not. It watched. Then it spoke, with her voice, but not her spirit. You are the first of the new geometry. Your chaos was the seed. Now order blooms. She took one more step and pressed her hand against the glass. It wasn't cold. It was alive. She felt it pulse beneath her fingers, feeding off her pattern, her story, her choices. This was never about memory. It was about conversion. The entity beneath the forest had used the Watchers to prepare humanity for replication, but when the lattice broke, it adapted. It began to use what it couldn't control. Her. The Watchers had tried to contain it. They had failed. Now it was absorbing not just memory, but structure of self. Elena clenched her jaw. If I was the seed, she said aloud, then I decide how it ends. She pulled out Elridge's notebook, now blank but still humming softly. The last tool made by human hands. She ripped the pages out and threw them at the mirror. Nothing. She grabbed the silver band embedded in her wrist and tore at it, screaming. It didn't budge. But the mirror flickered. For the first time, her reflection faltered, just a fraction. A delay. That was enough. She reached into her pack and pulled the last artifact she'd kept hidden. A sliver of the original orb from Echo Point, collected quietly after the chamber collapsed. Still active. Still unstable. And human-made. Let's see what your perfect system does with this, she whispered. She pressed the shard against the mirror. The effect was instant. The chamber roared. Light burst from the reflection, shredding through its smooth surface. Her double howled, not in pain, but in confusion. The spiral began to contract, reversing, unraveling. The sphere behind her cracked, not in fury, but in panic. Elena felt her body begin to lift, not weightless, but pulled inward, as though the system was trying to reabsorb her. Rejecting pattern. Error cascading. Spiral collapsing. Fracture, permanent. The mirror exploded in a flood of white. The walls shattered outward. And Elena fell. Through light. Through memory. Through herself. Until she landed in the snow. She gasped, the cold cutting her lungs. She was back on the ridge. The forest was silent again, but normal. No humming. No pulses. Just wind, birds, and the scent of pine. She touched her wrist. The silver band was gone. Beside her, Elridge's notebook sat closed, untouched. She opened it. The pages were full again, but not with data. With names. Hundreds of them. And a single sentence scrawled in her own handwriting. The spiral has cracked. Some may still return. She looked to the sky. Above, the clouds broke, revealing a perfect spiral of stars. But this time, it didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a warning. The snow around Elena shimmered in the pale light as the spiral of stars slowly faded into the night sky, swallowed by clouds. The forest was quiet again, but not empty. The silence held breath, as though the Bitterroot itself waited to see what she would do next. She sat on the frozen ground, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages of the notebook. Every name written inside felt familiar. Not in memory, but in weight. She could feel them, like echoes pressed into her skin. Thomas Elridge, Miriam Vance, Daniel Shaw, Lena Brooks, Samuel Vieri, all listed without dates, without locations. Just names. But between each line, small symbols had been drawn, fractured spirals, misshapen hexagons, and eventually, nothing. Blank space. The spiral had cracked. And with it, the system had released more than just her. Across the treetops, she spotted a faint shimmer of movement. Not unnatural. A person. She rose, her muscles aching, and followed it. The trail led her to a slope she hadn't crossed before, one not marked on any ranger map. At the bottom stood a weathered wooden structure, ancient and half-collapsed, covered in ivy and lichen. A fire flickered weakly inside. She approached. A man sat alone beside the flames, wrapped in wool and silence. He turned slowly. It was Samuel Vieri, but older, real, alive. "Elena," he rasped. "You broke it." She dropped to her knees, stunned. "I thought you." "I was taken. But not fully," he said. "They replicated part of me, tried to integrate it into the lattice. But the core rejected my uncertainty. I slipped through the breach when you shattered the system." He tossed another branch into the fire. "They built the lattice to control chaos, but they never understood it. Emotion corrupted their order. And you," he looked at her, eyes weary, "you brought too much of it with you." Elena sat beside him, staring into the flames. "Are we still in it?" she asked. "No," he said. "We're outside now. But the spiral can never be truly sealed again. The breach is permanent." She pulled out the notebook. "The names. Do you know what they mean?" He nodded. "The ones who resisted replication. The ones who held onto their identity long enough to fracture the loop. Some of them might still be reachable." "Alive?" she asked. "Somewhere between alive and remembered." Elena looked into the fire, her thoughts racing. "If we found them," she said slowly, "could we bring them all the way back?" Samuel didn't answer immediately. Then, "I don't know. But if anyone can navigate what's left of the spiral's core, it's you. You've touched every layer." The wind outside changed. Not in direction, but in texture. It carried faint voices, calling names. Not shouting, remembering. Elena opened the notebook again. Blank pages filled in as she turned them. New names. Old names. Some she recognized from missing person reports. Others from legends. Each line felt heavier than the last, like gravity thickening with every memory restored. And then she saw her own name, written across the final page, followed by one word: Anchor. Her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't just the breach. She was the tether, the last human marker in a system that had forgotten how to forget. The fire crackled, but the world outside the cabin shifted, just slightly. Somewhere, the spiral still turned. But now it turned on her axis. Morning came slowly in the Bitterroot. The sun filtered through the trees like a hesitant promise. The forest, reborn from fracture, breathed differently now. Less machine, more memory. Elena stood outside the cabin, the frost crunching under her boots, the notebook clutched tightly in her hands. Inside, Samuel Vieri slept deeply, his body still recovering from years stretched between echoes and layers. But Elena, she felt awake. She turned to the page where her name had appeared. Elena Hartman, Anchor. It wasn't a title. It was a function. She understood now. The lattice had failed not because of a virus or a flaw. It had collapsed because of memory. Real, imperfect memory. Emotion. Guilt. Regret. Love. These were the elements the system could not normalize, could not flatten into structure. And now, with the structure gone, the spiral had become unstable, uncoiled, unpredictable, but not aimless. It was seeking a new center. That center was her. She made the journey by foot. The forest welcomed her now. Animals returned, wind spoke, rivers ran along their rightful beds. But she saw the marks left by the collapse. Trees that twisted the wrong way, boulders carved with impossible angles, whispers at night that no longer belonged to the lattice but lingered anyway. The final coordinates, drawn into her dreams, sketched in frost, whispered from the broken mirror, led her to a place untouched by maps. A glacial crater, hidden behind a wall of blackened pines. At its center, a pool. Still. Silent. Deep beyond comprehension. This, she knew, was where the spiral had rooted itself again. Below the water, beneath the layers of forgotten stone. Not a machine. Not a monolith. Just presence. A will that remembered being bound. She stepped into the water. It was ice cold. But it did not reject her. The moment she was waist deep, the spiral reappeared, not in the sky, but across the surface. Faint lines of light, drawing themselves outward, circling her slowly. Then the voices came. Not the Watchers. The Lost. Thomas. Miriam. Daniel. Names from the notebook. Their echoes swirled in the water, rising to meet her. You are the anchor. Hold the breach. Keep us from fading. We remember because you refuse to forget. Let us pass back through you. She felt them not as weight, but as warmth, moments, regrets, laughter, all pressing gently against her skin like a tide. She opened herself to them, and in that instant they returned. Not as ghosts, not as perfect replications, but as people. The crater shimmered. Across the rim, forms emerged from the mist, confused, blinking, cold, but alive. Dozens of them. Real, fragile, unfinished. Samuel appeared at her side, drawn by the pull. He stared in silence, tears on his face. "It's happening," he whispered. "You're doing it." The notebook in her hand crumbled into dust. Its task was complete. Elena looked around the crater, the spiral fading into the water, replaced by ripples of light. Not containment, not structure. Freedom. Imperfect, fractured, real. And then, as the first rays of true dawn pierced the trees, she finally felt the presence recede. The last layer of the spiral uncoiled. The system went quiet. Not broken, but finally at peace.